She threw the wine glass at the wall 3 inches from my head. The red spread across the white paint like something bleeding. I stood there and watched it drip. That was the moment I understood my son had become a stranger to me. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a man who gives up easily. I built a landscaping company from a single rusted truck and $1,400 in my checking account. I worked every summer under a Georgia sun that would make grown men cry. I missed baseball games and recitals and Thanksgiving dinners because the work didn't stop just because the calendar said holiday. I did all of that for my family. I did all of that because I believed that what you build, you pass down. That is what my father taught me, and his father taught him, and I took that as gospel. My name is not important. What is important is that I spent 41 years making something out of nothing. My company, Caldwell Green, employed 63 people at its peak. We did commercial contracts, residential estates, municipal parks. My name was on the trucks, on the uniforms, on the building on Hartwell Road that I paid off in cash the year my son turned 20. I want you to remember that. I paid that building off in cash, because it matters later. My son's name is Derek. He is 34 years old. He has his mother's eyes, which is both a blessing and a curse, because his mother, God rest her, was the most beautiful and most stubborn woman I ever loved. She passed 11 years ago from a heart condition we didn't catch in time. Derek was 23 when we lost her. I think that changed him in ways neither of us could name, and for a long time I excused a lot of what came after because of that grief. I want to be honest about that. I made excuses. I kept making them long after I should have stopped. Derek married a woman named Cassie 4 years ago. I tried to like Cassie. I genuinely tried. She was sharp, ambitious, well-dressed. She laughed at the right moments and said all the right things to my face. But there was something behind her eyes when she looked at me and at the company that I can only describe now as calculation. I felt it. I dismissed it. You tell yourself you're being an overprotective father. You tell yourself you're projecting. You tell yourself your son is a grown man and he chose her and that is his right. So you smile at Sunday dinners and you ask about her sister's new baby and you pass the bread and you pretend you don't see it. About 2 years into their marriage, Derek started coming around the office more. Not to work. He had never really worked in the company in any serious capacity, which was something I had accepted over the years. He studied finance in college, got a decent job at a wealth management firm in Atlanta, and I never pushed him to join Caldwell Green because I wanted the choice to be his. But when he started showing up at the office, I thought maybe things were changing. Maybe he was finally interested. He would ask questions, not operational questions. Not how do we retain the municipal contracts or what is the replacement schedule for the equipment. He asked about the building deed. He asked about the LLC structure. He asked about who was listed as secondary on the business accounts. I answered everything. He was my son. I thought he was learning. What he was actually doing was building a map. I found this out the way you find out most things when it's almost too late. My accountant, a woman named Ruth, who has worked with me for 19 years, pulled me aside one afternoon in late October and told me that someone had been calling the county assessor's office, making inquiries about the property value and transfer tax on the Hartwell Road building. She had heard this from a friend who worked in that office. She didn't want to say who was making the calls. She didn't have to. I already knew. I sat with that information for 3 weeks. I didn't confront Derek. I didn't call a lawyer. I just watched. I kept the same schedule, attended the same family dinners, acted like nothing had changed, but I started paying attention in a different way. The kind of attention you pay when you realize the ground under your feet might not be solid. What I pieced together over those 3 weeks was this. Derek and Cassie had been consulting with an attorney about a conservatorship. They were building a case that I was no longer mentally capable of managing the business. They had talked to 2 of my employees, both of whom came to me separately and told me they had been asked uncomfortable questions about whether I had seemed confused lately, whether I had repeated myself, whether I had made any business decisions that seemed erratic. Neither of my employees cooperated. Both of them came to me. I want you to hold on to that, because when everything fell apart, it was the people I had treated with dignity for decades who stood beside me. I also learned that Cassie had spoken to a real estate attorney about what a forced sale of the Hartwell Road property would yield if a conservator were appointed to manage my affairs. She had done this under her own name, not Derek's, just hers, as if that provided some kind of distance. The Sunday dinner in November was the last one I attended at their house. I want to describe it because it matters. It was cold that day, the kind of gray Georgia November that feels like the sky has given up. Cassie had cooked a roast and there were candles on the table, and Derek's college friend Marcus was there with his girlfriend, which I later understood was intentional. An audience. I brought a bottle of bourbon I had been saving for a special occasion. I don't know what I thought the occasion was. I suppose I was still hoping I had misread everything. Dinner started fine. We talked about football and Marcus's new job and whether the cold snap would last into December. I relaxed slightly. I told myself Ruth had been mistaken. I told myself I had been paranoid. The bourbon went around the table and everyone laughed, and I thought, maybe this is fine. Maybe this is still my family. Then Cassie said, very calmly, that she and Derek had been thinking about the future of the company. She said she was worried about me carrying such a heavy burden at my age. She used the word burden 3 times in 2 minutes. I counted. Derek did not look at me when she spoke. He looked at his plate. I said I was fine. I said the company was running well. I said I appreciated the concern. Cassie said that a professional management firm had offered to take over operations, that it might be time to consider transitioning, that they had spoken to an attorney about how to make the process smooth and in everyone's best interest. She said everyone's best interest the way someone says it when they mean their own. I looked at my son. I waited for him to look at me. He didn't. I said, Derek, do you have something you want to say to me directly? He finally looked up, and what I saw in his face was not the boy I had raised. It was something closed off and decided, the look of someone who has made their choice before they sit down at the table. He said, Dad, Cassie's right. You're not as sharp as you used to be. You're making decisions that don't make sense. It's better for everyone if you step back. I asked him what decisions he was referring to. He couldn't name one, because there weren't any. He repeated that I wasn't as sharp, that people at the company had concerns, that Cassie had spoken to professionals who agreed it was time. Marcus and his girlfriend were very quiet. I pushed my chair back. I picked up my coat from the hook by the door. I said, I built that company before you were born. I will decide what happens to it. Then I left. Derek followed me to the driveway. He grabbed my arm, not hard, but he grabbed it, and he said, if you don't do this willingly, we are going to have to do it another way. We have talked to a doctor. We have talked to a lawyer. You can make this easy, or you can make it hard. I looked at my son's hand on my arm. I looked at his face. I said, take your hand off me. He did, but he didn't back down. He said, you're going to do this, Dad, one way or another. I got in my truck. I drove home. I did not sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because I was grieving something I was finally willing to admit was already gone. The next morning, I called my own attorney, a man named Carl who has handled my legal affairs for 22 years. I told him everything. Carl listened without interrupting, which is what I have always valued about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, good thing you called when you did. Carl walked me through what I needed to understand. Because the business was structured as an LLC with me as sole managing member, and because I had never formally transferred any ownership interest to Derek, he had no legal claim to the company or its assets. The conservatorship route they were exploring required a court petition and medical evidence of incapacity, none of which existed because there was nothing to support it. 2 employees willing to speak on my behalf would be more than sufficient to counter anything they had collected. But Carl also told me something I had not considered. He said that if I died tomorrow or became incapacitated next week, my current estate plan would leave the business and all its assets to Derek as sole heir. What they were trying to do legally would be difficult. What they would inherit by simply waiting was everything. He said, you need to change that plan. Now. I spent the week after that conversation doing exactly what Carl advised. I updated my will. I restructured the LLC to add a successor managing member, a trusted employee named Gerald who had been with me 26 years and who I had already been considering for a senior role. I set up a charitable remainder trust for a significant portion of the company's assets, designating 2 nonprofits in my wife's memory. I also made sure the Hartwell Road building title was clear, unencumbered, and in a holding entity that had no connection to any of Derek's inquiries. I did all of this quietly, efficiently, without drama. Then I waited. Derek called me twice that week. I answered both times and spoke normally. I asked about his job. I asked if Cassie's sister's baby was sleeping better. He sounded confused by my calmness. Good. That was intentional. 2 weeks later, he came to the office unannounced. He walked in with a manila folder under his arm and an expression on his face that told me Cassie had coached him before he walked through the door. He sat across from me at my own desk, and he opened the folder and laid out a document that was a proposed management agreement, transferring operational authority over Caldwell Green to a firm called Meridian Property Group. He had already signed the Meridian line, as if his signature meant anything on a document related to my company. He pushed it across the desk toward me. I didn't touch it. I said, "Derek, who told you that you had the authority to engage a management firm on behalf of this company?" He said, "Dad, this is happening whether you sign or not. We are prepared to proceed legally." I said, "You should have talked to a better attorney." He said, "We have." I said, "No, you haven't. Because if you had, they would have told you there is nothing you can do. You own nothing. Your name is on nothing. You have no standing. What you have done is spend money on legal advice that was wrong and frighten 2 of my employees and make inquiries at the county assessor's office under your wife's name. That's what you've done." His face changed. The practiced calm he walked in with cracked. He said, "You're not going to do this to us." I said, "Do what? Protect what I built?" He stood up. He was shaking slightly, the way he used to shake when he was a boy, and he was trying not to cry in front of me. But this was not that. This was something harder and uglier. He picked up the folder. He pointed it at me and he said, "You were supposed to give me this. You promised. Mom would have wanted you to give me this." I let that land. I let the silence hold for a full 5 seconds. Then I said, "Don't bring your mother into what you've been doing." He left. I sat at my desk for a long time after he walked out. I looked at the framed photo on the corner of my desk, the one from the summer Derek was 8, the 2 of us standing beside the first company truck I ever owned, both of us squinting into the sun. He had been so proud that day. He kept telling the neighbors his dad had a real business. He told his teacher at school. He made me come in for show and tell, and I stood in front of 23 second graders and talked about how grass grows. I put the photo face down. Not in anger, just because I needed to see clearly. The following Monday, I called Gerald into my office. Gerald is a big, quiet man from Alabama who has driven my equipment for more than 2 decades without a single complaint. He is one of those people who does the work without needing anyone to notice. I told him what had been happening. I told him about the restructuring. I told him I wanted him to be prepared to take over operations, potentially soon. He looked at me for a long moment and then he said, "Mr. Caldwell, I've been ready for years. Whatever you need." That steadied something in me that had been unsteady for weeks. I also called Derek's college friend Marcus. I had his number from a Christmas card list. I asked him to tell me honestly what had happened at that dinner, what he had seen and heard. Marcus was quiet on the phone for a long moment. Then he said that Cassie had spoken to him before the dinner. She had told him that I had been showing signs of confusion at work and that the family was worried. She had wanted him there as a witness in case I said anything that could be documented as irrational. Marcus said he felt sick about it after. He said that's why he came to me. I thanked him. I told him I didn't hold it against him. I don't. People get used. That is not always their fault. December came. I had not spoken to Derek in 3 weeks. He had sent 2 text messages, both of which referenced his attorney and used the word inevitable. I did not respond to either. I spent that December doing 2 things simultaneously. I ran my business the way I always had, showing up early, checking in with the crews, reviewing the contracts, attending every scheduled meeting, and I worked with Carl to complete everything we needed to complete legally. By the 2nd week of December, the restructuring was finalized. The charitable trust was active. Gerald's role was formally established. My estate documents were updated and witnessed and filed. On December 17th, I called Derek. He answered on the second ring. I told him I would like to meet with him in person. He sounded surprised. He said, "Are you ready to talk about the transition?" I said, "I am ready to talk." He suggested lunch the following day at a restaurant we used to go to when he was in high school. I said that was fine. I want to tell you about that lunch because I want you to understand what I saw. I arrived first, and I was already seated when he walked in. He was alone, which surprised me. I had expected Cassie. He sat down and we ordered, and for the first few minutes we talked about nothing. The weather, the drive, the menu. He seemed almost relieved. I think he had convinced himself that my calling meant I had come around to his position. I think he had spent 3 weeks believing that he had won, and that this lunch was the formality of surrender. He was wrong about that. When the food came, I put my fork down and I told him exactly what I had done. I told him about the LLC restructuring. I told him about Gerald. I told him about the charitable trust. I told him about the updated will. I told him I had spoken to Carl, and I told him what Carl had told me about his legal standing, which was none. I laid it out item by item, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with facts. Derek stopped eating partway through. By the time I finished, he was very still. He said, "You gave everything away." I said, "I protected what I built from people who wanted to take it." He said, "I'm your son." I said, "Yes. And a son who loves his father does not file inquiries at the county assessor's office under his wife's name. A son who loves his father does not coach employees to testify to incompetence that doesn't exist. A son who loves his father does not show up at his office with a management agreement and say this is happening whether you sign or not." He was quiet. I said, "I would have given you everything, not because your mother would have wanted it, though she would have, but because you are my son, and I loved you, and I would have handed you this company with both hands and been proud to watch you grow it. But you didn't ask for it. You tried to take it, and those are two very different things." He said, "Cassie thought." I stopped him there. I said, "You are a 34-year-old man. Whatever Cassie thought, you made a choice. Own that." He looked down at the table. Something moved in his face. I don't know if it was regret or anger or grief. I still don't know. Maybe I never will. I paid the check. I stood up. I said, "I hope one day you figure out who you are without someone else's plan in your ear. I genuinely hope that. I will not wait around for it." I left him sitting at the table. The week between Christmas and New Year's, I finalized what I had been quietly arranging for 2 months. I had purchased a property in coastal North Carolina, a house on the Sound with a wraparound porch and enough land to have a garden. I had told only Ruth and Gerald, both of whom I trusted completely. I had arranged for Gerald to step into the managing role on January 2nd. I had spoken to the 63 employees at a company meeting on December 28th and told them the company was in good hands and that I was stepping back, but that nothing about their jobs was changing. Several of them embraced me. 2 of them cried. That undid me a little. I will admit that. On New Year's Eve, I drove past the Hartwell Road building one last time. I parked across the street and sat there for a while with the engine running. I thought about the rusted truck and the $1,400. I thought about Derek at 8 years old telling his teacher about his dad's real business. I thought about my wife standing in the parking lot the day I paid off the building, how she had put her hand flat on the brick wall like she was feeling the heartbeat of it. I let myself feel all of that, and then I put the truck in drive, and I left. January 1st, before the sun came up, I loaded the last boxes into my truck. The house I had lived in for 27 years was already under contract. The moving company had taken the furniture 2 days before. What was left fit in the back of a pickup truck, which is funny when you consider everything that had accumulated in that house over a lifetime. But stuff is just stuff. I had learned that. I drove east. The sun came up somewhere around the South Carolina state line, and it came up all at once, orange and enormous, the way it does in winter when the air is clear. I had the window cracked, and the heater on, and the radio quiet. I thought about nothing for a long time. That was the first time in months that I had been able to think about nothing. The house on the Sound was exactly what it had looked like in the photographs, which was a relief. I had taken a risk buying it without a proper visit, but sometimes you look at a photograph and you know. The porch wrapped all the way around and the view across the water in January was gray and cold and completely peaceful. I stood on that porch for a long time after I got the door unlocked. Just stood there. The wind off the water smelled like salt and something green underneath it. A heron stood motionless in the shallows 20 feet out, entirely unconcerned with me. I understood that bird. Gerald called me that afternoon. He said the first day had gone smoothly. 3 crew chiefs had come in early to help with the transition. The contracts were in order. The coffee in the break room was terrible, as always. He said he would fix that first. I laughed. The first real laugh in longer than I wanted to count. Ruth called that evening. She said the books were clean, everything was current, and that she had already received 2 calls from clients renewing their spring contracts. She also said, and I want to be precise about how she said this, she said, "You did the right thing in the right order. That woman has a gift for saying exactly what needs to be said in the fewest possible words." Derek has not called. It has been several weeks now. I do not know what he and Cassie are doing or planning or saying to each other in the house they live in. That house, I should mention, is a house they own outright. I bought it for them as a wedding gift. I signed it over to Derek's name cleanly. No strings. Theirs. That was mine to give, and I gave it. The rest was not theirs to take, and they knew that, and they tried anyway. The Bible says, "The love of money is the root of all evil." I didn't fully understand that as a practical matter until I watched my son slide a management agreement across my desk with his wife's instructions behind his eyes. I'm not a preacher. I'm not here to moralize, but I will tell you that money is not neutral. Money reveals things in people that were already there. It doesn't create the character. It just removes whatever was covering it. What I know is this. I gave my son every advantage I could give him. I gave him education and safety and the knowledge that he was loved. I gave him a father who showed up even when showing up was hard. I cannot give him integrity. That is something you grow yourself or you don't grow at all. I think about my wife on the hard nights. I think about whether she would have seen this coming before I did, whether she would have handled it differently, whether she would have found a way to reach Derek that I couldn't. Probably. She was better at people than I ever was. But I also know she would not have let anyone, not even her own son, strip away what we built together. She was gentle, and she was fierce in equal measure, and I loved her for both. The heron comes back to the same spot in the shallows most mornings now. I've started having my coffee on the porch just to watch it. There is a diner in town that does biscuits the way they should be done, with actual butter and actual time. I've started driving the back roads on Sunday afternoons, just to learn the landscape. There is a community garden 2 miles down the road that I've put my name in for a plot come spring. I am 63 years old. I have my health and my mind and the work of my hands behind me. I have people who trusted me enough to stay loyal when they didn't have to be. I have a house on the water and a heron and biscuits on Tuesday and the whole of the rest of my life ahead of me. What I do not have is a son who respects me. That is the true cost of all of this, and I will not pretend otherwise. That grief is real, and I carry it the way you carry, the kind of loss that doesn't have a clean edge to it. It is not finished. It is not healed. Some mornings I pick up my phone and I start to dial his number and I put the phone back down and I stand there for a moment in my kitchen with the sound coming in off the water. Then I pour another cup of coffee and I walk back out to the porch. Because I learned something at 63 that I wish I had learned sooner. You cannot love someone into becoming who they should be. You can only be who you are, clearly and without apology, and let that stand as the record of your life. Whatever comes after is not in your hands. The record of my life is in 63 people who still have their jobs. It is in a building on Hartwell Road with my name on the door. It is in a charitable trust that will fund 2 programs in my wife's memory for as long as the company stands. It is in a heron standing in cold January water, absolutely still, perfectly itself. That is enough. That is more than enough. If you are a father watching this, and something in your gut has been telling you to pay attention, to look harder, to stop excusing what cannot be excused, then pay attention. The earlier you look clearly at the truth, the more of your life you have left to live well. I boarded no plane to anywhere dramatic. I just drove east until I could smell the ocean, and I have not looked back since.